Welcome to Google Plus Community Insights. We managed to assemble a very interesting group here this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are. David Amerlin, John Keldon, Mark Vane, and myself, Randy Resnick. I'm going to turn it right over to David, and he is the moderator who is going to take you through this thing. It's a jungle, but we're going to find out how to get our way out. It looks like David just came back. So... we're having some problems. Really glad this is a tested, tried and true technology. We need to...
Well, that's okay. Earlier today I did the first 3 minutes and 44 seconds of my morning HOA with my microphone turned off, so, you know.
It happens to
it's
all.
either human error or Google error, one of the two, all the time.
All right, well, we're waiting for David to come back because he is the moderator, hopefully, but suddenly a few problems. I have a couple of minutes. He may be with us now live. David.
I am. Yeah, sorry about that. I seem to have. Yeah. It starts off with a bang, as always. And hello, and I'm very, very glad everybody's here. We're covering quite a few things today, and we're really talking about communities. And we have with us Randy Resnick, Mark Vane, and John Keldon, none of which really should require any kind of introduction, but we will actually do have some introductions, so we can actually fill in a few backgrounds. And let's start off with Randy, please. Randy, if you just give a quick intro of who you are and what you do.
Sure. First of all, I wanted to mention, and I did in one of my posts, that my interest in community has been from the ham radio days of like the 1960s, so we go back a little ways on community. But once online communities happened, one of my first experiences was with CompuServe. CompuServe used to have forums, and one of the forums, I'm an expatriate, and one of the forums was an expat forum. I met a very good friend, friend for life, one of my closest friends on that. But we also met, my wife and I had a business, and we met our best client that we kept with for decades on that CompuServe expatriate forum. And hopefully we'll get back to the your behavior on communities and how that affects things, because this relationship was made on a single post. Somebody posted, I answered it, and then like we had for 16 years, we had the best client of our entire career. So,
I think that's a tremendous introduction of yourself, Randy, because it also shows the power of communities, and hopefully we'll be able to address some of that and the impact they have in terms of business. And let's go now to Mark Vane, please. And Mark, please unmute yourself and just introduce yourself very briefly.
Okay. Thanks, David, and it's great to be on the panel with you guys today. Randy and I were actually in one of my test communities a while back. I don't know if you remember the SoundCloud, what was it, PlusCast community, which is something we'll talk about. Is, you think you have ideas for communities, and sometimes they take off, sometimes they don't, and it's a very tough decision to make. But my experience is originally started, I would say, with LinkedIn groups, and I identified, there was a large spam issue. So it wasn't really so much that I wanted to be a community manager or help out in that way, even though I'd been participating in communities and even back to BBSs, like Randy indicates, many, many years. But then that kind of got me thinking about all of this, and I've, was one of the, started a private community on Google Plus, which has been very successful. It's kind of a model that I use, and we can talk about public versus private, on both LinkedIn and Google Plus. So it's been an important part not only of my business, but also how I communicate with people, how I connect with people, because it's very difficult on social platforms to try to keep people compartmentalized or segmented properly, so who likes to talk about what. So the communities are very good for that. You can find similar interests. So that's my main background with communities, and so I'll toss it back to David there.
It's brilliant. Thank you very much. And finally, last but not least, John Keldon. And John, please, if you can unmute yourself and just introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, David. Well, 2001 could be one starting point where I got invited to something called Brainstorms, which started in '98 by Hangout. And then fast forward basically to November 2012, where Google Plus opened the floodgates for kind of everyone, and the kitchen sink to sort of just go open, and communities. And I saw, well, the usual kind of usual suspects, right? Like Star Trek and Android and whatnot. And I knew that I didn't want to do that, right? And then it's kind of the next question was that, okay, so then what, right? And I basically started. I never thought I actually would get away with you starting a conversation community, right? Because it's kind of one of those things hidden in plain sight, kind of what we always do. And I'm possibly one of the worst possible online community managers there is, right? Because I'm really crap at listening. But I just had this sort of passion for really good, high-quality conversations. I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen, all right? And then now, 2 years in, we're actually in the sort of process of actually launching a couple of for-profits and not-for-profits out of the conversation community. So, I mean, there you go, right? This kind of we've grown now to, I think, it's more than 1,100 members. I'm really not exactly sure how that happened. And since I'm not kind of exactly sure, and since I'm Swedish and I really hate not knowing, so I just teased out a couple of patterns, basically sort of to figure out some inkling on what's actually going on in Google Plus communities. So very shortly, kind of that's me.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, and let's sort of frame the whole conversation a little bit. Now, we obviously all run communities. We all have done for some time now. I am part owner and moderator of Google Plus's largest fitness community with almost 350,000 members at the moment, I think, probably getting near to 400,000. Apart from that, I also run a few smaller communities. And there are the reason we're discussing communities is because obviously we're interested in terms of the effectiveness they have in terms of developing a subject, a conversation, and increasing the value set and the knowledge they generate. And on the back of all that, of course, there's always the commercial question of how do you commercialize a community, where is the value in that, and how do you run that as an individual, or how do you run that as a business, a company? And these are questions which we'll hopefully answer as we go through. And let's start off with Randy, and I'm going to throw the first question to Randy now, really. And the question is, just how do you start a community? Because it can start as an idea, but one person does not make a community make. So how do you find your members? Randy, please.
Well, David, that's obviously an excellent question, and a lot of, I think Mark in some of our exchanges via email also made the point of, or maybe it was in some of his things that he's done previously, but anyway, the point is also, if you're going to be on Google+, have you looked to see if there's already a fitness community, for example? And if I wanted to start one, I'd look and see that you have a large and vibrant fitness community, so probably, unless I have some major difference, maybe I should just join yours and see how that goes. Anyway, on Google+, you would want to see what is already there. On the wild west of the internet, you might look around and see if there is, I don't know, I'm going to say PHP, it's a programming language. How many communities are there? I don't know. You look around and see what's happening. If there's nothing happening, then you're filling a need. Now, in my case, I have a very, I think, a fairly unique situation. Since we had a community already, I was involved with a lot of people through mailing lists. That's the old-time 2004, peer support kind of thing, an IRC. And eventually, we put that together and did a site, and it went through, I'm not even going to go into detail on this. We went through Facebook, it was Twitter, and each time I dragged people from one thing to the next, some of them stayed where they were, some of them came along. But the important thing to understand is that once we finally decided to drag everybody on Google+, then everybody's like, well, so what do we do now? And fortunately, Google created Google+ communities. And I think these communities, as I've said many places, these communities are the next best thing that Google has done after Hangouts, because it's unique to them. It's brilliant. Now, I also want to mention in passing, there are two things that when you start a community, there are two things you need to realize, and those have to do, well, I think Mark will get into the private and public thing, but I'm losing the train. I was trying to think of the important thing with the communities, and I suddenly thought of public and private, and that threw me off. So
So let's go to Mark, and we'll come back to this, Randy. So,
now I'm going to say the important thing and scoop you on it.
as you always do, Mark. This is your want. And let's discuss this now. I mean, Randy threw the ball onto your court in terms of private and public communities. So let's answer the simple question first. How do you decide? Why would you want a private or a public community? What are the benefits and the drawbacks?
Well, my first experiments with communities were actually mistakes, because my very first community on Google Plus, well, there were two. One was a miraculous success because it was about chess, which is a popular keyword, which is something you could keep in mind when you're making a community. And it was right when communities rolled out, so it was one of the first chess communities. So just by luck, I happened to make a community that has kind of grown all on its own without me doing much work. As Randy pointed out, you should probably look around and see if your community is actually filling a need if you're planning on creating one, because many people have shared stories of how they create a community. It takes a lot of work, and it just never takes off. And probably if there's already a large community or a different community, you might have trouble competing. Not saying that larger communities are better. I wouldn't want to discourage anybody, from creating a whole brand new fitness community, even though there's a mass, the fitness community that.
Thank you for that.
Might be better off just, kicking in and trying something smaller, maybe niche. But regarding the public and private, you can't undo any of this stuff after you create your community. So you really should sit down and think about how you want to bring members into your community. How you want conversations to take place. For example, I often set up private. I have a private community called Sanctuary Networking Community, and I set it up originally as a private unlisted community, which means it didn't even show up in community search. So it's like a secret community at that point. I felt that was a little restrictive because I wanted some word of mouth to maybe help grow the community, even though I wanted to control membership. So I had to destroy basically, like Randy's talked about, convince everybody to come over to a new community, which many of the members did. That's where you find out who's reading their notifications, right? You have to tear down one community, and maybe 70% of the people show up, and the rest of them, who knows what happened. So I've been through a couple iterations like that. It's very painful, and also if you I think your name gets locked in, and I'm not sure on the stats, but I think when you hit 25,000 members or something, don't quote me on that, but your name gets locked in and you can't change it anymore. So you should take careful note of that. I remember very early in a community, I think run by John Skeets. He has the community moderators community, or he's one of the moderators in that. A member had inadvertently used a trademarked name in their community, and their community grew, and they could no longer change the name. And I don't know what resolved, but Google wasn't very helpful in manually changing names, and it might have ended up with their community being deleted because of a trademark issue. So think about all these little things going forward. I see a lot of communities using trademark names and logos and all that, and I think right now the communities are still pretty new, but there's some big companies that really don't like that and will start making the rounds. Anyway,
understandable, absolutely understandable. And let's on that note, let's go back to Randy now, because you mentioned about communities and trademarks and growing a community and transferring it from a different place to here. And if we go to Randy now, and Randy, please, you mentioned your own community went from place to place to place, and you shed some members along the way, and probably picked up new ones as you came to a new environment. And the question really is, as you do these transfers, the question is why? Why would you change platforms?
Yeah, great question, and there's a caveat with it too, which is that sometimes you can completely mess it up. I was working at one time with a community. This was a brilliant idea by a person whose name is very well known, A-list blogger. I won't even go there as far as telling who it is, but the point is, he suddenly met somebody and who was building Ning, which was a great system. Anybody remember Ning, by the way?
Yeah, I remember, yes.
So this was, anyway, Ning was a new platform. And he dumped the Facebook group. He had a Facebook group, thousands of people, big name guy, dumped it, went to Ning, lost a lot of people, and then Ning took its own orientation, eventually became for pay and so on, and that whole thing just dissolved. I think it's just a spam hotel right now. And by the way, this brings me back to the thing that I forgot. You know, at my advanced age, you need memory aids, and I have a thing in front of me that I couldn't see. And this goes to this changing of your platforms as well. Because what I wanted to say was, there are two things you need to remember about doing a Google Plus community. One is the advantages are Google hosts it, they maintain the software, they update it. There's absolutely nothing you have to do within that realm. So it's not like doing a Ning group, or I mean, there's so much you have to do with all these different hosted things. On the other hand, the disadvantage is exactly the same thing. Google hosts it, Google maintains it, and Google puts the new features in. And if you don't like the new features or you want new features, basically you're on your own. You cannot. There is no plug-in architecture. And Mark Vang just said something that's very important, and I have a really good slide on that in a minute too, which is spam control. Google's spam control has been excellent for me. We have, every time there's a spam waiting for me, I've thought about it. I looked at it. Is this? It's not spam, by the way. It's just undesirable. I looked at it, and you know what? I don't think there's ever been a false spam. I don't think so. The only time that would happen would be if somebody posted something that's a little commercial or spammy or whatever, but that this is someone who I told that they could do it, that we approved of it. Let me hear about your experiences with spam, guys, the control of Google's spam before we move on, because that's a thing that I find to be very good.
Well, in the fitness community, because of its size, it attracts an incredible number of spammers. There are 4 moderators, and we have anything between 200 and 300 spam posts a day.
Wow.
To go through. The false positive rate is incredibly small, so they're usually spam that has been caught by Google. So I can attest to the fact the filter is extremely good, and it seems to be getting better all the time. And I think the reason it's getting better, the reason it's so good in the first place, is because Google Plus is such a transparent network for Google. They can actually read all the signals, the interaction. They can check the profiles and the signature of each profile and the activity associated with it. And algorithmically, they're extremely good at actually spotting spammers, which is really encouraging. And on that note, can we go to John now? Because we've been discussing communities and transferring them. And really the key is, once you have a community, how do you engage? How do you make sure that it grows, the content is there, you are seeing it grow? And for those of you who haven't experienced the conversation lab that John runs, he does an incredible job at actually getting things going. So John, what sort of criteria, what sort of choices do you have to make as a community moderator and owner?
Well, there's actually sort of 3 rules in the conversation community, and the two real ones is basically all the men are basically trying to get away with as much sort of to content marketing for themselves as possible without sort of John, the omniscient leader, coming and wrapping their knuckles. Right? So that's kind of one of the 3 rules. And the other rule is basically for all the women, and they try to post as pretty and as nice and as kind of aware post as possible with reasonable expectation that everyone will then sort of discover that how sort of true, good, and beautiful they are, right? And these are really the 2 sort of unwritten, unspoken, never to be mentioned. And obviously, since I'm being me, right? I now and then actually make explicit some of these things, and there I sort of change the whole dynamic, because suddenly now people realize that I really sort of can't get away with this, and then kind of the next realization kicks in. Well, John is cool with that, right? And then there's obviously the 3rd rule, I mean the only written down rule, right? The only mandatory rule, if you will, and that is just a very simple one. But it is kind of surprisingly complex once you sort of begin to sort of look at the constituent parts, and it is add considerate comments on other people's posts. And this is kind of in keeping with the conversation community not sort of being topic driven, but sort of process driven. So you can actually participate for as long or as short as you want. You can sort of see it as you making kind of a slingshot, if you will. And once you sort of gleaned given and received everything you want to from conversations as a process, you're kind of free to go. You're free to kind of do. And the paradoxical thing is that when people see that there's no obligation, I will not sort of squeeze your arm to get you to stay. A surprisingly large number of them will actually stay and sort of see how far can I take conversations and dialogue. So this is kind of the core dynamic that drives it, sort of the realization that there is tacit rules and explicit rules, and the conversations actually happens in between this sort of negotiation of these sort of this sort of me allowing this zone field for people to basically sharing what they want to share.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And before we go into the next link on this, which is community dynamics, we do have a question to address from David F. Leopold, and Common Tracker doesn't seem to be working very well for me right now, so I'll have to just read it out. And basically he asks the question, what are the Google guidelines? Sorry, I've got to find the right one. It says...
got enough down there if Randy wants to switch.
Yeah, we're gonna. I wanted to comment on that, but let's do your thing first, David.
Okay, what are the Google guidelines for spam? He's asking, which is the first one.
Oh, you want to? Well, I'll just hit that, and then we can.
Okay. Let's cover that. Yeah.
First of all, I wanted to mention too, and I wanted to ask those of you who may have communities that you have to have approval to join. My community is a medium or small community, 750 people. We like it that way. I do not want to start messing with 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people. So I personally, or one of the moderators, will vet everybody. So Mark does too, and good. Hopefully we'll compare notes. I just want to mention one quick thing though. What do I do when I get several of these every day? And if I can, or one of the moderators, what we do is we go look at these. And the reason I'm answering this other person's question is because I think Google might be using this same chemistry. Here's a slide. A guy wanted to, hopefully his identity is not obvious here. He wanted to join. I go look at the thing, and you look at, you're immediately, as soon as you click on their name, you see their posts. Well, look at this. Interesting. He says, 25 times the same post in 25 communities. I don't think so, folks. So we're not going to, we are not going to go with this fellow for the community. The other thing I look at also is the nexus of the topic. Has he or she ever posted on it? Do they know anybody I know? That's about it. And before, I think that Google may possibly, in their algorithm, look at that thing and see that the person is posting on 700 communities the same post. That, if I was Google, I would be, because that to me is a big red flag. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, well, first of all, like you point out, that's probably the easiest signal for Google to pick up on when somebody's posting this, and it's usually identical text and everything. A lot of these spammers are very lazy; they don't even bother to change the text. So I can imagine that's super easy for Google to pick up on. They seem to get some other more subtle things as well, but I think that once you get tagged as that kind of behavior, your post now will also show up as potential spam, even if it's not meeting one of those patterns. So you should really be careful about how you interact in communities. And if you do want to share the same link, be very selective about which communities you share it with, maybe mix it up a bit, because the broadcast method is not going to work on Google. You're going to get yourself, and also, as Randy points out, many community moderators are actively checking your profiles, at least for that. I take it even a little farther. I'll look people up on LinkedIn, and I'll look them up on Twitter, and I'll look them all over, and I'll see if their profiles on LinkedIn and Google Plus match. This is for my private community for Sanctuary. I do have a couple public communities where I'll just give them, I have like a request to join setting just to make sure they're not total spam bots. But for Sanctuary, I go through a pretty serious process where I'll look them over, and if their LinkedIn thing says they do one thing and their Google Plus thing says they do another thing, and I look at their posts, and they're not really transparent about who they are, what they're doing, they're not going to get in. Of course, that doesn't really work for a large, high-volume community, but that's not what I want. That's not my goal in Sanctuary. And as you kind of talked about, I think John was talking about behavior and the community culture. I think David can probably attest to this. There's no link spamming in Sanctuary, and I think a lot of members there came over from my LinkedIn group, which was the private group for community owners who were fighting spam. They all know I hate spam. So I think I may have even set a culture in that group where people don't even want to, they're almost ask permission. Can I share this link, Mark? And I'll think, yes, okay, because they know that I just hate seeing links show up without some sort of discussion or something. So I don't know if I put the fear of God in my community or what, but I'm not
Well,
against it. Just to put it on record, I'm not against people sharing relevant content. But it's so easy for that to snowball out of control, and communities just get buried in links, and then there's no conversation. It's like LinkedIn. Every group on LinkedIn now is just a link spam fest. So anyway, maybe it's good to.
Those are important points, actually, and the common thread in I mean, each of you tackles things a little bit differently, but the common thread throughout is that essentially you're focused on quality, which means that as community owners and moderators, you are acting as the guardians of the network, and you're very aware of the responsibility placed upon you by the members. And the second thing is that essentially you're all engaged. There's no such thing as a community run on autopilot, which I think is gradually leading us to where we're beginning to sort of formulate a formula, if you like, of how to actually build a quality community. And there's a question now on the stream by Michelle Rebel, who says, Rybel, sorry. He says, what are the mistakes that people usually make when they start a community? And let's go to Randy with this one first, please.
I don't think I'm the one to answer that, because I think that you really need to start your community. I only have one suggestion, which is be very careful about naming it. And this has already been said, but if I recall correctly, I started a community for an event, and the event is annual, and we have the 2013 in the title because I thought they would be changeable. And although this was a very small niche community, I was not able to change the title. Maybe this has changed since then, maybe you can now. But you want to be very careful with the titles of your community, and also the descriptions, because keywords actually work very well. So your description of your community, if it has the word football in it, even if it's not named football, it'll come up when somebody looks for football, presumably. But I'm not the one to say what not to do, because I think things have worked out pretty well for us. Well, yeah, I'll give you one thing. What not to do, you don't start a community and then not engage. But I mean, that's fairly obvious, isn't it?
Absolutely.
If I could toss a couple things on that.
Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Well, first of all, there's the public-private, and how do I let members in? That's very important, because once you set public or private, you can't change that. So there are a couple things that Google won't let you change. Now, you can change the setting whether people have to be reviewed or whether people can just join en masse. So there are a couple things, but be real careful about how you want members to come in and how you want to vet members. If you don't care about it, do the public thing with the floodgates open. Another thing I might suggest is what I did with Sanctuary is it's a private community, so you can't see the description for the community. When anybody views it, they have to request to join, and all they get to see is the logo picture, and that's it. All the other information, the membership information, is hidden. That's something you should consider as well, because if you're building a community for a company, you don't want your competitors to come along with Circloscope and lift the entire community member, which is something that I do for my clients, by the way. So you should really think about that, because there are a lot of nice tools that can grab your entire membership and shoot it to your competitors.
Okay.
But also, I created a brand page for Sanctuary. So the community was first, and then I thought, well, private, but there's no way for me to reach out for new members. So I created the public brand page and the YouTube channel to host the HOA events, which are very good kind of recruiting tool for the community and awareness tool. So it allows me to keep the community private, so people can have a sense of security in their discussions. A lot of times people don't want to come out as a newbie, in a public discussion, so they want to ask questions in kind of a safe community. But I also have that full-on public face where people can circle the Sanctuary page. So that might be a tactic you want to look at if you want to control membership, but also, get out there and get in search rankings and get on YouTube and stuff like that. Make a brand page for your community, and make the brand page manage the community. So if you have community, if you have a big community, you can set managers for the brand page, and they can act as the Sanctuary networking community page can interact with the community. So you kind of give your moderators a little buffer if it's one of these active communities, like it does God exist, you know, that one's going to be a fun one, stuff like that. You know, maybe give them a little buffer where they can act as the page if they have to do an enforcement activity, so they don't take heat on their personal profiles. Just a couple I can't tell you how many times.
Yes, absolutely, and obviously now we begin to get quite granular on the strategy. But let's take the question to John. And John, you know, have you got anything to add in terms of mistakes that people could make in the beginning, or anything in terms of managing the community better as you move forward?
Well, I mean, obviously I made thousands of mistakes, right? So that's a really good strategy. You should make tons of mistakes, and then eventually you sort of figure out what really works. And in terms of new communities or new members in existing communities, is usually two very common mistakes, right? One is just sort of dumping a post, which could be a good really post or a comment. It's just that it sort of replicates what someone else just did or said, which is kind of a dead giveaway that you're actually not sort of paying attention. And that is kind of the kind of almost the one unpardonable sin in the network. If you kind of just, here I am talking about this, and yeah, we did that 15 minutes ago, okay. And the other very common mistake is to assume lots and lots of things, right? And you could see that there's a let's say kind of popular. I mean, I'm going to disbuffer here, apologies, right? Which is touted as and for very prolific, very kind of engaged, it's a godsend, right? Because you can sort of pace stuff out from and for the European public and American public and so on. But if you're doing that, and it's a really, really great post, it garners lots of responses, and next Thursday, the original poster comes back and yeah, thanks, right? That really isn't sort of sending the right signal, right? So those are two of, I mean, I have a whole catalog. I have actually 100 of those things that you really should never do. I mean, but that's kind of for much longer delving into the and before I sort of diss anyone sort of personally, I mean, I made all those mistakes myself, like throughout 2011, 2012. So it's kind of no disrespect meant, right? We all make mistakes. Right? There's another thing Mark Wang actually said that I think is kind of crucial. I mean, I do Monday magazines, and those are sort of curations of select stuff happening in the conversation community, and then those I post to my public stream, which means that without actually sort of having to say attaboy or fantastic or too much of those, every week there's an amplification, a curation of whatever is I can sort of consider high quality. So it serves like amplification, it serves like rewarding those who really spend some serious time in actually contributing or creating value. And it's also great for building awareness of Google Plus community itself, right? So there's lots and lots of things that can be done basically by having this combination of Google Plus as communities and the stream, right? So this is kind of a thing that usually doesn't get mentioned, that we have sort of both, right? The benefit of both things.
Exactly. And I like the fact that you mentioned engagement and involvement, because basically it leads us into the next question, which is all about community dynamics. You know, how do you make sure that the community itself behaves or moves in a certain direction? How do you make sure that the members behave themselves even when you're not there? How do you set the tone and the character, and how do you generate the ethos necessary? This is all about creating culture and how communities actually grow. So let's try to address those questions by going now to Randy. And Randy, I know I sort of asked a lot of questions at the same time, but let's take them any way you like, from the easiest to the hardest.
Okay, well, I think that we covered this a little bit, but one of the basic concerns is what people are posting, and forgetting spam, getting away from that for a second. You've also got the people who are just going to be posting commercial, links to their blog. In my community, it's a tech community, and there are a couple of people who post links to their blog and who I've begged to post because their blogs are so good, and they are not blogs that are linked to something they're selling. Okay, they may have a few ads on it, but the main impetus there is technical information that's valid. This speaks to the two things that people are looking for when they go to a community. Now, we're talking about not managing a community, but the person who is the people who are who are populating your community, they want value and they want access. The access is the people who are there. In my community, for example, we have professionals. In those 780 people, whatever it is, there are probably about 100 of them that are in the top actors in that, the top players, I should say, in the field that we're in. Okay, so if you wanted to, it's a lot easier than LinkedIn to be talking to people. You can post a question and so on. That's access to people. If the community was a community for, say, an actor or personality, they would want access to that personality. And if I can open a parentheses here, one of the biggest failures that I've observed is that I started a community for someone who is an actor and a personality, and I did everything I could in my power. This is not for money or anything. I just did it because I thought this person was good and would be great. And what happened was the people using their social... So we got a little community going, a couple, maybe 100 people or something. And what happened was that the people in charge of their social media were barely posting the dates of the appearances and so on. They were not, you know, what are you going to do? You've got to get on a day or even once a week and start schmoozing, is the best word for it, with people, even if it's just a quick thing, or maybe a couple of personal photos. If not photos, you know, nothing revealing or crazy. Just you need to engage. And the other thing, so that's access to people, access to people who are important, who can help you. And the other thing is value, and they're really the same thing. The value being support, being getting something from a business standpoint. I'm sure you guys have something to say about that. What am I getting here? Am I getting consulting? Am I getting kind of a taste of the consulting that if I was in the... So maybe you've got the public face of your consulting business. After all, I don't do this on social media, but I was a consultant for years. You want people to hear about you, then you want them to see what you do. And to bring it all back to the community thing, even if you are not the person in the even if you're not the leader or the moderator of the community behavior is super important. I have hired people on the basis of looking at them and how they answer people's posts in communities. I'm sure I'm not the only one here who has. You look at people and you go, this person is level-headed, there is not an ego problem here, they are answering questions and giving support, and David just dropped out, so I think I'll just keep talking for another hour. No.
I could pull an Al Haig and go, I've assumed command.
I'm going to throw it back to you,
we didn't think this out. Is this a Speaker of the House, and then you know what happens here when the...
Do not have that. But anyway, as I was saying, value, access, and I'm sure both of you have something to say about that while we're waiting for David to come back. So, Mark, you want to take it?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, a lot of it is driven by the personality of the people running the community. So if, and I've talked to a lot of people, they want to start a community for business to get the funnel going. It's all funnel. You know, I want to identify people, but if you're not going to have somebody who is a social leader in your business organization who can commit time and energy to that, then it's not going to be valid. It's going to turn into one of these dead-end link spam communities, just like everything else, and it's going to have no value for people to really join. The only people who will join it are the people who want to just have one more place to dump links to, and nobody's even listening. You know, there's so many automated posting tools nowadays. You know, LinkedIn, once again, I'll use them as an example. You know, you can just shovel stuff in there and you can see the people never interact. So if you're not, you know, hiring someone to build a community for you, I think is a sorry to say this, a tremendous waste of money, because if you don't have the time, if you're a business or if you're a celebrity and you're not going to put the time in to interact with them, and this actually applies to all of social media. I mean, you're pretty much better off buying an ad the yellow pages if you're not going to put in some face time of your own, no matter what the platform is. And you know, that's why my community works, is because I'm in there interacting with people, sometimes probably more than they want. You know, they can't even turn me off at times. But I mean, you have to have at least moderators that are engaged, or the leadership in the community, whether it's you know, just one person or several. So if you can't do that, and you have to be realistic about that, because there is a time commitment that it takes just to keep all this stuff going. And if you're like already at the point where you can't make 15 minutes out of the day to answer your Google Plus post, then you're probably not going to have much luck running a community.
You know, if I can just interject one thing with that, Mark, because I agree totally, but it's exactly like blogging. So many corporate blogs are, it's just noise. If you don't have time to sit down and say something there, it's true of LinkedIn streams too, by the way. These things are all the same. Community, blog, LinkedIn, it's all the same thing. Either you're trying to get the funnel happening, which is fine, but it's not going to work, because there's too much noise out there. This is the attention economy, and you're not going to get any attention. I wanted to ask John, I don't want to take over here, David, because you're back, but...
That's fine, I'm okay with that.
I was curious about John's, because I was in John's community for a while, and the reason I left is because there's too much great stuff there. I would have done that all day. So I couldn't... I really couldn't...
John is too good at this. I know exactly what you mean. So yeah, John, please answer that.
No, there's too many. So go ahead, John. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I could give you kind of possibly something. I just have to say big kudos to you, because we are kind of coming from 4 different directions, right? And we significant overlap with sort of the experience, which is in itself an amazing story. So if nothing else, for the viewers and listeners, I mean, this is a big takeaway, right? If there's such a convergence, and I'm feeling myself nodding energetically to everything you say. But here's the thing: if you want to sort of do kind of a slightly more businessy structured approach to this, right? Then there's data. I mean, data is basically is the community growing? Do you have the stats? Do you have the this and the that? I mean, contextually relevant for whatever size. I mean, everything from 752 to 50,000 or 300,000 or whatever, right? So the data needs to be congruent with that. And then the structure, obviously, we sort of cover that, and lots and lots of great insights from all of you. And also service, obviously, let's call it community as a service. Right? So some kind of funnel happening, some kind of trust building, relationship building via engagement, right? But the thing that we are talking about is kind of the missing 4th quadrant, kind of the whole people-centric thing, right? So once businesses begin to understand, wow, if I have some kind of people-centric lens with which to view structured data and service, I mean, there's kind of just a wealth of opportunities, right? If you want to launch a product, for instance, in Google+, you can do so for the simple sheer fact that we are right here. So if I would sort of to be kind of a corporate and launching a product, I would just go look up the brightest, best influencers, brokers, what's not, right? People who are sort of good standing, well connected, and I would go talk with them. How can I present, view this, perks, whatnot, right? Is there something here that might be of interest to you? And obviously, between the 4 of us, we could come up with tons of things that we could do if it would be a good enough product, right? And this also brings me kind of full circle back to kind of one of the possibly most important benefits of the whole Google Plus thing. I mean, particularly communities, which is that eventually, when sort of the digital literacy kicks in, we will be able to more and more trim tab towards really good, decent products, so getting more airtime, and considerably the suckage will sort of get considerably less, right? So this is kind of one of the core reasons for why I'm doing this, because whenever there's someone in the conversation community who has a great product, I'm going to flaunt it, right? I'm going to push it because I can, right? Because it's good stuff. So there's no kind of dichotomy in my world between, oh, he's doing business, so he can't sort of join the conversation community. On the contrary, the kind of the blurring of this is a good thing, considered that we have the data to prove our standing, right? Our trust. I mean, there's a big topic on the trust, right? But I wanted to touch on it. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to come back to the trust question because I think it's critical, and you raised quite a few points here. Before we actually cover anything else, let's address something which I need to sort of point at all of you and ask the question. In any community, irrespective of size, whether it's large or it's small, how do you deal with the inevitable cliques that develop? And let's take this one to Randy, please.
Again, probably in my 750 people, I don't think there's that much clicks. I think, first of all, I think we could all agree that most people in communities are lurkers. Is that true or not? Nod your heads or say yes. The majority of people lurk. They read.
Yeah, well, I think we have
The fitness community.
there's a different dynamic between a large community and a small community. Now, we know, and I know that studies that have happened in the past show that small communities tend to stick together and work because the people in them remain largely the same, but large communities tend to function well because the people in them constantly change. So in a large community, you expect in a set number of years, let's say between 2 and 5, to have completely new members. And obviously not everybody will change, but this is what actually keeps them together. So the dynamic is actually different in each one. However, what is common to both a small community and a large community is that cliques inevitably develop, and depending on how they're handled, they can become a disruptive force or they can become a uniting force. They can, in either case, they help set the culture. And the role of the moderator, stroke owner, most of the time is key to how this actually happens. So let's take this question to Mark, please, now.
Oh, okay. I have to say that in my community, I don't know if that's really happened. Of course, you don't know how people are grouping up behind you, so that really might be something I don't even know about. I have noticed that certain topics will pull out certain groups of people, and they will also interact with each other, share a post and interact with each other, which is, by the way, something I like to see. I like to see the community kind of motivate its own discussions. I haven't had any cliquish, as in us versus them kind of negative stuff going on. My chess community, my biggest one, chess people are very quiet, seem to be, I guess they're very competitive in chess, but I don't have any issues with people arguing about, you think they'd be very passionate, but maybe because it's a multi-language, multicultural, they can't argue with each other because they don't know what they're saying. But
let's just good point. Let's define, just for the sake of this HOA, the Hangout, essentially what clique is in a community setting. And clique usually has negative connotations of a very closed group of people who sometimes engage in negative activity. But essentially a clique in any kind of community setting is exactly what you described, Mark, where people are forming relationships which are within a very closed personal network within that community, and information flows along those connection lines between them. And that's essentially what a clique is. And if it's not managed properly, it has actually two things which can happen. First of all, we can get potentially to that negative area where a clique suddenly becomes very protective of its own identity within the community. It begins to perhaps assert its own authority over other community members and becomes disruptive. And the second thing is that essentially a clique, in the formal sense of the word, is the means through which information gets propagated in the community, because not everybody is equally connected in the community. So essentially, even within 750 members, there are groups of people who are more connected than others. Their connectivity becomes the amplification point, which ensures that information flows throughout the network. And if you have 2 or 3 cliques, then you basically get information flowing everywhere. If you don't, then gaps develop, and not everybody sees what they expect to see, and then you begin to get a potential community collapse or community dysfunction. So back to you, and I'm sorry about the interjection. I just thought it was important to clarify this because what you were describing actually fits the picture. So back to you, Mark.
I think that where my community might be a little, or at least using Sanctuary as the example, is a little different, is that, for example, Randy's community is focused on, I would say, a topic-centric. So you're going to have people discussing, areas of that topic where there'll be, probably what you're talking about, David. I experienced when I managed the Linux community on Google, on LinkedIn, where you would have favorites around various distros and stuff like that, distributions and stuff like that. But Sanctuary is kind of an amorphous blob. Anything that we feel is helpful knowledge is fair game. So there's, I don't think it really, builds that kind of loyalty on a certain topic or subject. And So I kind of, whether by accident or design, I kind of maybe got away with that, But there can't be any clicks in Sanctuary because nobody knows what we talk about. So.
Okay, and on that point now, let's go to business, because essentially the real value of communities, and when I say real value, this is within inverted commas. So let's translate that into the commercial value of communities lie in their value to the business world. So how do you monetize a community? How do you make sure that it begins to perhaps work a little bit more commercially? And there are a lot of tangents to this, but let's go for the direct one. Let's eschew SEO for now and visibility in search and domain authority, and let's look at the direct connection between a business that perhaps wants to enter a community or a business that wants to start a community of its own. How do we actually make that work? And Randy, please.
Sure. Now, my community is made of either no clicks or a million clicks because I'm getting to the business thing, don't worry. I just wanted to say, though, that basically in a community that's 700, maybe 1,000 people, you may well, if you're around a topic, you may well have like-minded people, whereas, as Mark mentioned, Linux, I mean, it becomes religious wars immediately. So it's two completely opposite things. Now, to address the question of business, in our community, we are not in business, but we do a lot of business with guests who come in, or people who are members, and they belong to a major player in some field. They're producing software, for example. This is, by the way, heavily influenced by open source. Think about that. It's important because open source is more about cooperation, and we're all groovy people, and we can get along, and so on, which is, of course, not completely true, especially if you're trying to make money. But the point is, this is a very specific example I'm going to give, finally, which is beta testing. And you've got your community, so you got the 700 people. You maybe have 100 good candidates for this fantastic new software that just came out, this new phone that people are going to use, whatever it is, software, not hardware. Could be hardware, though. You want a beta test community, and you need to engage the community. What is a beta test, by the way? It's when you give somebody software free or promise it to them. If they test it and give you significant feedback. Now, sometimes you can get into beta programs where you don't do anything and you get a free piece of software. Personally, I think that's not cool, first of all. And second of all, you're fooling yourself. You're just getting a piece of free software. You didn't do anything. So one of the concrete things that you can do about this is you're your company, you start your community. I guess it's probably not good to name names, but if I was going to name names, I'd say something like Parallels, who make a product for to run Windows on Mac, among other things. It's a virtual machine. And they have a couple of competitors. Maybe one of these companies is on Google+, for example. Maybe they have a community. Because generally what people do is they have stuff out, they do their own forums, and so on. And this speaks to another question, which is, by the way, which is who is on Google+? Because if the people that you're doing business with aren't there, then obviously don't start a community there. I think
that's obvious. That's a good point. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning.
Obviously, let me just say one thing about this slide that I have here, by the way, because this speaks also to this whole thing of business and so on. Suppose you've got a product that has something to do with Android. Well, I took a look on a search of Android communities. The first one is just called Android. It has 500,000 people in the community. 230, 250,000 posts. So, boy, there's something going on there. I don't know if it's spam. You'd have to go look. The second community, also called just Android, 250,000 people, almost 100,000 posts, 176 for developers, couple of developer communities. Now, let's take a quick look at iPhone, Apple iPhone, 33,000, 10,000, 9,000, so on. But if you had an iPhone product, you might want to look at those things and see what's happening there. And if what you want to talk about with your customers or potential customers is not happening there, that might be the time to start a community. And just for fairness, here it is, BlackBerry community. There are actually 4,000 people in the BlackBerry community called BlackBerry with as many posts. There are the 3,000. So anyway, there's more than one BlackBerry community. And finally, just to show you that we want to be fair and show you that there are very small communities, the accordion community. If you were an accordion manufacturer or player, there's a couple of very small communities. However, note the ask to join on the Cleveland Accordion Club or whatever it is. These, just to give you the contrast on this, if you wanted to sell something that had to do with Hunger Games, here you've got some of the biggest communities on Google+. But anyway, business, you want to talk to people, you would want to get the right people. And are they on Google+ is the very first question I think you'd all agree that you need to ask.
That's
Android,
perfect.
obviously,
That's perfect.
Android is a huge example, and that's why I brought that up.
I'm gonna disagree with that just a tad, actually.
Yeah, Mark, I was going to say over to you, but please do disagree.
Yeah,
Go
I
on.
disagree on that because in social media you hear this over and over again. Find out where your customers are. I don't care where the customers are. I care where they're going to be in 2 years, and I think Google Plus is going to be the future of all that. So I think it's important to maintain, have a strategy where you're addressing the needs of people right now, but you also shouldn't look at Google Plus or any. And of course, all of us on Google have lived through the ghost town thing a bajillion times now, and here, well, there aren't any good Google communities. We're not going to set it up. No, actually, that means now is the time to do it. Now's the time to establish your foothold, because the one.
That's an important distinction, Mark. Actually, thank you very much for making that, because essentially, you're right. Business tends to look at a short-term gain and make decisions along those lines. But you're also right in that really the business that survives is one that is in it for the long run. So yes, on that note, valid point, and back to you, Mark, please.
Okay. I did want to touch on the monetization a little bit as well, because I've actually done that with Sanctuary. And since I'm a consultant, one of the things, and this wasn't the original intention, by the way, I tend to stumble into things and then think, oh, that's a good idea, and I'll try it out and see if it works. And as John was pointing out, you have to make your mistakes all the time and see what works and what doesn't. So I decided to introduce premium memberships in Sanctuary. Now, that doesn't exclude anybody from the community or activities in the community or any of the things that make the community attractive. And I think that's a real important thing. And I know there's some other folks, there are probably some people we could mention who do Hangout consulting. I can't remember that guy's name, Reginald or something, I don't know. But he's built a private community, which I would say is a monetized community, because you have to buy into his plan to get into the community. I kind of looked at that and said, I don't want to make the community gated by payment. I want everybody to get into the community because I want them to see what's going on. I want them to see what's going on, then give them opportunities to get additional, basically, social media services through the community through a membership. So there are ways you could directly monetize your community. And I looked very closely at rules for Google. Of course, these rules can change all the time. There do not appear to be any restrictions about that. But in case I were ever asked, I would say I'm not charging people to join the community. I'm charging them for extra services outside of the community, the website and stuff like that. But for a small business that we're a consulting service, we talked about help outs a little bit in the green room. You can find a way to kind of monetize your services while giving yourself good exposure, and the community is really the best way to do that, I think, on Google+, because you can control so many aspects of it, like the membership that lead into, like, I have a private secret community for markvang.com, which is only for clients and stuff like that. So there are all kinds of different ways you can manage that. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think openness is the nature of communities. So you're not going to be able to talk people into joining your private secret community where you're going to try to sell them a bunch of stuff until they know a lot about you in the first place. So you either need to leverage a very large public profile and work your butt off at that, which is, David and I think everybody here has worked at that, or you need to have a community where people can see how they can engage in the community and see the value. So.
I think, Mark, you're making a very important statement, or in terms of trust, which is what John has already mentioned, really, which is critically important for anything to happen. You're absolutely right. And on that note, John, have you got anything to add to what Mark and Randy have already said?
Yeah, I mean, both you and Mark and Randy, you're touching upon a kind of a critical thing here, and that is kind of the engagement combined with discernment, kind of the attention to detail. So I can just give you one little glimpse. I'm keeping very close track on number of pluses on individual comments, and via that very kind of simple data point, I can sort of glean where there's clicks, where there's increased trust flow, where there's informal leaders, and I have kind of a very fluid. I mean, basically all these 1,100 people in the conversation community are my clients, even whether they pay me or not, right? So, and by noticing these things and then sort of adapt my behavior and setting my examples sort of accordingly as a response to, even though I usually don't mention this, then if there's someone who I believe is providing immense value, and she or he is not a member of a clique, so he or she gets sort of regularly shunned by the most popular cliques in the conversation community, then I can sort of address that via, for instance, the Monday magazines. I making a special note that that is kind of a big amplification of a large block quote, or putting them first or something like that. And that usually does a trick. 2 weeks after, that person from having been a nobody suddenly now is more regularly commented and plus upon, right? So, because people kind of notice these things, right? They see that, oh,
Absolutely.
John is actually kind of amplifying value, right? So kind of rather than telling them that stuff, I'm kind of doing that, right?
Okay, that's great. Okay, 2 great comments in the thread. We have one from Christina Blount Presnell, who said she's seen cliques develop on regularly held hangouts. It makes it uncomfortable for new folks to come in. To manage it, she switches the weekly schedule and hosts a lineup of a couple of times, along with sitting in and bringing in new folks with her. So essentially, you know, this is the active participation of the community owner stroke moderator in the community itself, leading from the front, setting the tone, and making sure that essentially the community works the way it should be. And then there's Amelia Hoskins, who says, you know, she promotes community. She agrees that G+ is the future and business will come here. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but essentially she also has to promote her communities on other platforms. And I think on that tone, or that note rather, we are getting into community spam, which is everybody's favorite subject. Quick note on that, please. Randy, what do you think?
So by community spam, you mean continually inviting everybody to your community, or?
Yes, community itself becoming a nuisance to the net, to the stream, and other participants. Yes.
And isn't it funny that almost every new feature that Google comes up with goes through that phase? Events went through it, and communities went through it, and whatever else is happening has gone through it. I don't see it as a problem, but you have to keep culling your circles, and as soon as you have to tell somebody, hey, you know, your community thing, you're over promoting it, it's lost, because you feel bad, they feel bad. That's not going to work. It's like people writing you with jokes. I gave up a long time ago telling them I don't want to hear them anymore. I just put them in a folder that I never look at.
There
I
aren't
think
any.
you have to do the same thing for community, so-called
Yes.
community.
And Mark, you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's one of the toughest parts about the community if you're trying to actively pull people in. I would say right off the bat, it's extra work, but get yourself a copy of Circloscope and make a spreadsheet, or somehow keep track of who you've invited and make sure you separate that information, and don't just invite masses of people just because they circle you, because you're going to get blocked, or your community might end up getting flagged as spam notifications. I don't even know what happens on the back end with Google if you send out too many invites. Do they like secretly, you know, sometimes things happen and you don't know. So you,
Well,
that's tough.
you
might
are
wanna
the
actively-
spammer. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're right. Okay, and we are reaching near the end of the time. Basically, we've barely scratched the surface, and the hour has really flown by. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you to just take 60 seconds and wrap up and give me your closing thoughts, please, starting with Randy.
Okay, here's the 60 seconds. Now, I just think that the very important thing, either whether you're judging a community that you might want to join, because you can all go look if it's not a private community, or if you're starting and running a community, is the moderation be careful who you choose, because if moderators are heavy-handed, that is so painful, it's horrible. They need to just, be cool and calm and not be telling people what to do all the time. On the other hand, you absolutely have to have that personality. You have to guide people. You have to explain. If somebody comes in and plops in and starts complaining about something, you have to be able to tell them, this is the way this is done, and I thought it was a good idea. What do you think, kind of thing. These are all really basic principles of society anyway, but it's just super important, and every one of you has said this in your own way. If you are running a community, you've got to have that personality happening. You've got to have that engagement and make people feel that they're at home. Just like when you walk into a restaurant and people the person starts looking around, oh, well, we don't have a table, that's immediately off-putting, right? Well,
yes,
with your communities, you got to be nice.
Great. Yeah. Fantastic. And John, can we take that to you, please? You got 60 seconds.
Yeah, I think I cram in two things, right? One, if you kind of true to yourself, you sort of find some resonance with some narrative, saving the world or the dolphins or whatnot. It really doesn't matter. If it's really kind of honestly, authentically you, go for it, right? Start a community around that, and so just commit, because that will attract great people, not only much people, but the right people will find you. And the finding thing is, you can cram in that as well. I found now, I'm really prolific Google Plus poster, right? And I find a very interesting thing now that the automatic recommendation thing for communities are improving very rapidly. So I'm almost once a week getting recommended to completely new, or for me unheard of community, which is really good. It doesn't mean it's kind of very prolific, but it's the algorithms are improving, which is really, really important in terms of for people to find stuff.
Perfect. And finally, Mark, you've got your 60 seconds.
Okay. Well, I would say, first of all, even though we probably would all agree that nobody ever reads them, maybe having a document that's clearly linked that has your community posting guidelines, because at the end of the day, if somebody's saying, why can't I do this, you can always say, here's the link, and everybody's supposed to read this. It's your responsibility as a community member. So community members do have a responsibility. Second of all, you need a strong leader, I think. If it's nice to kind of rule by committee, I guess, and a lot of communities have a lot of moderators, but if there isn't somebody who can drop the hammer and people know who that somebody is, I think you can kind of go into anarchy fairly quickly, especially if you have controversial topics. So everybody should know that when so-and-so shows up in a thread that it's time to cool it. So if you don't have a strong leader in the community and someone who has an active presence where everybody understands how they think, then you might run into problems. If you think you're going to start one of these communities where everybody's just going to get along and we're all just going to, there are no leaders, I think you might run into some problems. Maybe that's my worldview. I don't know. And one last thing I'd like to say regarding community promoting. Google did turn on a feature where you can show communities on your profiles. I don't know how effective this is at building membership or anything, but if you want to support communities you're in, make sure they're showing up on your profile. And that's one way you as a community member can kind of help spread the word about good communities, or plus mention them occasionally and stuff like that to help your community grow and attract the right people. So.
Thank you, Mark. That's brilliant. And actually, I can testify that that particular feature, it can be very effective in driving community traffic to the community itself, provided you are very active in your personal profile and actually engage people as opposed to just broadcasting. Now, on that note, we sort of have come, unfortunately, to the end of just over an hour, and we've barely scratched the surface. Communities are a huge subject, clearly. There are a lot of interesting points about them, and we're going to see more and more questions developing. And hopefully, we'll be able to come back and tackle this from a different angle, going a little bit deeper, perhaps, or becoming a little bit more specific, because today's topic was pretty broad, and we ended just making tiny inroads into it. I'd like to thank Randy, John, and Mark for their presence here today, and I'd like to thank all of you who participated in the stream and watched us. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.